coming out of the presentation that we did at the center here in Charlottesville, I got really hyped up and really animated about like that audience. So it was this group of maybe 80 older adults.
Yeah.
Not super, like maybe in their 70s.
Yeah.
And the thesis of that conversation where you and I were panelists was, how do we prepare? And I was shocked, maybe more shocked than you were, at the attendance in that room.
And the participation. I mean, the Q&A could have gone on
forever.
Yeah, ad nauseum.
And so I really kind of threw myself into wanting to build some structure around those conversations, which you do professionally ad hoc. But I wanted to get better at being able to like be a guide.
Yeah.
So built this kind of aging prepared workshop.
Okay.
And in the last couple of years have put about 1,000 people through it across different markets. And I just felt like in this transition, I wanted to figure out a way to bring some of that stuff online.
Okay.
And so I'm more interested in trying to do that by reconnecting with the people that I trust in the space.
Okay.
And getting to know them better. And so I guess I want to start by refreshing my understanding of your background. My recollection is you started in corporate America, made a transition into the senior services space. But tell me about that.
Yeah. So I graduated college in 1992 with an English degree. I mean, what on earth was I going to do with that? And I took a job in downtown Baltimore, and it was really a job I thought was sort of beneath me. I was the administrative assistant to a guy who owned a bunch of A-plus apartment complexes. He was taking old sailcloth factories and other neat industrial spaces and converting them to A-plus apartment units. I started as a secretary, and he was sort of the pinnacle of the whole organization. Everything stopped with Joe. And if employees had an issue, they brought it to Joe. And I just sort of naturally began fielding those employee questions and problems and listening and offering possible solutions and so forth, so on. But again, it was a job. I wasn't at all satisfied with what I was doing. And unbeknownst to me, I'd sent a resume in to a job opening. The owner of that company was Joe's best friend. So Joe...
He found out.
He told on me. And said, hey, I think your admin, Katie's trying to leave. And so Joe approached me and he said, why don't you be my HR manager? I said, sure. It was a tiny company. There were 120 employees, but it really was baptism by fire. I was responsible for payroll and renewing the benefits program every year and all the more soft skills of HR, the hiring, the firing, the performance feedback, even the organizational culture and vibe. Joe was a tough guy to work for. He was temperamental and could be cruel. And so sort of naturally my job became to some extent protecting the workforce from him.
That's a tough job.
It didn't bother me perhaps like it should have. I don't know. I felt in a weird way good at it.
Yeah.
And then from there I went and took another larger HR job in Washington, D.C. This was a real estate investment trust. So it was more housing related, not far off from the first job. And then I went to work for Chevron in San Francisco. And
when was that?
1997. So really a 5-year ramp up to becoming sort of a legitimate HR professional.
Right.
And HR is this, umbrella term that covers 100 different individual disciplines under it. But I had had some exposure to probably 80% of those disciplines and was learning that I could speak persuasively about what I was observing. I think that was sort of the nugget that I landed on at a fairly young age. And went to work for Chevron for 10 years, advanced there pretty quickly. Very male-dominated society, and in a way, I think being a female helped. It never felt like a detriment. I think everybody was so careful. All right, we're this male-dominated culture. It's a leadership team of all men. We now have a female HR lead.
In the early 2000s.
The early 2000s.
Right.
It worked for me. And I thank God for all the women before me that didn't have that experience, but I did.
It's interesting because now you're in a pretty female-dominated industry.
Correct.
Yeah. Any of that by, well, we'll get there, but I'm curious if we can draw some comparisons. But
yeah. In there too, I would move to different operating companies, and Chevron Shipping, the tankers, the LNG ships, all of that stuff. I was the HR lead. In there too, a pretty temperamental president.
Right.
Mariners are tough bastards. And there too, I sort of fell into that role of not protecting the workforce from him, but massaging his messages, softening the culture to some extent, and trying to bridge this mentality of management versus employee. Sort of, look, I'm not pro-management, I'm not pro-employee, I'm pro-business. And that means, we need policies and operations that allow the business to run reliably, but we also need happy, satisfied, motivated employees. And so if you just stay on the side of the business, you're gonna solve both sides.
Yeah.
And then I had a baby and didn't want to travel as much as I was. It was a big job. It was bound to get bigger. And so I moved east and went to work locally for LexisNexis legal publishers. So if you're an attorney, you're doing your legal research either through Westlaw or LexisNexis. And at that point, started in HR, but then moved to product development. And so I would manage the royalty authors on behalf of a couple of different practice areas, including labor, HR, Social Security, disability. And so it was my job to keep track of the trends in those practice areas and recruit attorney writers accordingly. So Facebook research of candidates was a new thing, right? We were suddenly discovering there was all this social media content surrounding who you were about to hire. And so employers were looking at that and let's go recruit an employment attorney who can opine on this subject. And that's kind of what I did. And I don't know, at this point I'd been in corporate America close to 20 years, I guess.
It sounds like along the way, it was pretty life-giving. I mean, you're working in corporate America, but you're sort of threading the needle there, or at least seeing the impact of your work on the people that you're supporting.
Yes. Which is what leads to the problem then. So when I moved into product development, I suddenly felt really far away from the impact of my effort. I was paid well. I worked with super smart people. I would travel occasionally. I mean, there was nothing not to like about it.
Right.
And yet I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
And I always tell this story. I sort of embarked on my year living gratefully. I told my husband, I said, this is probably just an issue with attitude. I've gotten entitled. I need to be more grateful about what I've got here. And so I drive to work every day with this mantra of gratitude. Did that for about a year, came home and said, I don't think gratitude.
It wasn't quite enough.
I don't think gratitude's the issue. I really hate it here.
Yeah.
And so, and like a lot of people in their late 40s, I started to kind of get philosophical. What do I want to do? And my husband does mergers and acquisitions for a living. So all he does is go around and evaluate businesses and talks to a lot of owners and ops guys. And, his attitude was, do your own thing. Like, Katie, you're as smart as any of these people. Just do it.
I guess I'm inclined to ask, did you doubt that? Like, what was that? How hard was that decision for you to bet on, bet on yourself? It sounds so trite, but
I would not have, I don't think I would have had the courage to do it without my husband, that partnership, that he had this matter-of-fact opinion about it. I decided I was going to have a somewhat matter-of-fact opinion about it. And bear in mind, I'd been in the workforce for 20 years. I had an MBA. I'd traveled the world. I'd seen a lot. And after a while, you sort of grow into your own skin, like, I can figure this out. I mean, that's the beauty of growing old, is that doubt really dissipates a lot. It's sort of like, yeah, I know some shit, you know?
Totally.
Right? And it's...
Any business owners in your family?
Yes. So my eldest brother, for a long time, back in the 80s, 90s, early aughts, had an infomercial company. So he shot infomercials out in California.
Oh, don't show him this.
And
let me get better first. Let me try to get better.
the lighting.
It's
the
hard.
lighting. And, you know, he was just sort of fearless. And in fact, a lot of the products that he was doing infomercials around were products he had developed. Remember the Red Devil, the little grill, or the Magic Bullet blender?
Definitely, both of
those were concepts that, I'm not saying I don't think he created the concepts, but those were early infomercials of his.
That's cool.
He
because
created a
those were-
diet concept. Yep.
Those were infomercial products.
Those were products.
Those were products.
Right.
Their success was the result of the infomercial, right? That's
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I asked because one of the lessons I feel like I'm relearning of late is just the power of what you see around you making your path, like how the impact of what you see around you on your own path.
What you experience as normal or doable or achievable matters a lot.
There was, you know, for a while there was a lot of talk about the notion of representation and its importance, and I don't think I understood that until I started to think about my own life in response to all of the decisions I have made have been reflections of the people that have been in my life and what they've done, or the places that I've gone are the places that I go.
Right.
And so,
we're amalgamations of everybody we've met and all the experiences we've had and all the places we've gone. And I think successful people are good amalgamators, right? To discard what isn't useful and synthesize what is into some, story you tell yourself about what's doable, what's achievable.
Yeah. It's also interesting, too, though. I wonder if you've now had the experience of being what your husband was for you, for others. I
hope.
I'm sure you have. It happens to me quite frequently where I'm just like, you can do the thing that you're talking about someone else doing.
You've totally got this.
Yeah.
Not that hard.
It's not. And people are so much, they overvalue what other people bring and they undervalue what they bring.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not a bad disposition to have, but not to the detriment of your own.
Do you find too, and I need to word this so it I'm not sounding either critical of others or arrogant myself, but I was always somebody who frequently felt less than, or would meet a CEO or an attorney or a judge and think, man, I got to be on high alert. I got to be on my game. This person is wicked smart.
Yeah.
And you get to know them a little better. You do a few things together. You work some issues out, and you realize, oh my God, they're just human.
Yeah.
And that normalizing of who we all are, I really find comforting.
Yeah, empowering as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. Like, I've got this.
Totally. I mean, I was going to call this podcast or this channel Hope Over Reason because I had a professor in law school who said, he said to me that I was a triumph of hope over reason. And it was meant sort of as a little bit of a, like, hey, I don't know how you got yourself here, but you ain't it. But he said it sort of couched in like, you've got something, but it's not like the same raw intellectual horsepower that a high-performing attorney has.
Right.
And that really, obviously, that really imprinted on me. And I've had that. I've brought that attitude forward throughout this entrepreneurial experience, where it's just like, I don't know what it is, but like I'm gonna have to outsource some of this.
Right.
But I'm just gonna trust what's in there.
And has it become more crystallized to you that what you know you're good at as you age? Or is it expanded? Has your sense of what you're good at gotten broader?
It hasn't. I don't know. It's certainly become more clear.
Okay.
That I'm kind of a warm fire. Like I can bring people in and keep them in, but I'm not good at selecting who should come in. So I would have been really bad at your job.
Okay.
I was bad at this job for a while until I decided like, oh, there are people that are better at like more intellectually rigorous and better at sort of being objective in their selection of talent.
Right.
That was an area where I'm super weak. And I'm not sure I have a better understanding of myself today than I did 12 years ago when we started the business, but I maybe have a better understanding of my weaknesses, the things I don't do.
Yeah. I just feel better at it, which is true of anything you do 10,000 hours, you just get better at it.
Yeah, it's a good kind of transitional point. I was having a conversation in Williamsburg yesterday with 15 80-plus-year-olds that live in a sort of a big subdivision in Williamsburg, and all of them are unplanned. And other than, hey, we want to stay in our homes. Right. And I walked in completely unprepared for the conversation, but to your point, like that is a space that I know. Yeah. And it's very life-giving. Right. To be able to come in and add value. Maybe we've talked about this. My dad's a retired hospice medical doctor. Yeah. And part of what I wanted to try to emulate in his career was just like the feeling of being super useful that he seemed to have, caring for and supporting the families of folks that are at the end of their lives. And this isn't that. What I do isn't that. But it does feel good. Certainly does feel good to have some pattern recognition and some insight to share.
Well, and it's a rush, too, when you see that expression of, on somebody else's face after you've given some advice or shared an experience, and suddenly you recognize that look on their face that was useful to them. That is a rush.
It is.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. And it's everyone is, when I narrate back to folks, like, so what's your plan? Is it kind of a wait and see? Are you kind of waiting and seeing? I always see the same kind of like, that is our plan. Like, this frustration and so one of the questions I wanted to ask is, we both deal with families and individuals who are smart, well-resourced, planning-oriented, and yet when it comes to what they are trying to accomplish, particularly if they're trying to stay in their home, so many are unprepared. They're unprepared to stay in their home. And I guess the first has that been your experience at IKOR? Does that resonate with you? And if so, why? Why do you think these folks who are prepared for so much, like, it's not like they don't have their estate plan, their finances in order, they've got bars on the showers, they live in one floor residences, but they don't actually know how to age in place?
I think our hardest clients are people who've been competent their whole lives, have been successful, independent, good problem solvers, feel comfortable that their judgment is good. Aging's just a game changer. It's not like any other experience they've had. And so sometimes there is that sense of misplaced competence that I've done everything else well. I got this. And that trying to point out this will be different. This will be different than anything else you've ever done. That can sometimes be a tough message to get through. So I think,
That's a great observation.
Masters of the universe types, female or male, masters of the universe types are the most difficult clients we come across. Or not difficult. There is obstinacy there, and the denial is often higher.
And so to play that forward, does that tend to result in further, practically, folks pushing away solutions longer, and that necessarily more reactive emergent situations?
100%.
Yeah. So I'm going to narrate to you what I think IKOR is, and you're gonna correct me at the margins. So we're in a bunch of different cities. There's a practice, it's called geriatric care management, and there are lots of folks at varying levels of sophistication and investment. There's a range of different styles of geriatric care management.
Yep.
There are folks that are retired social workers or registered nurses or case managers that have an understanding of a system, and they have insight that they want to share, and families will come to them,
right,
and they will share their advice, but it's more of a mom and pop type.
It's solo practitioners who function as consultants. And it's valuable, don't get me wrong.
Very valuable.
We refer our clients sometimes to solo practitioners. Look, you don't need the depth and breadth of what we do.
Yeah.
Call this person.
So in yours, I would describe IKOR in a grouping of a small grouping across the markets that we work of sort of super professional, almost a professional services firm.
That's fair. And for people out there listening who think I don't know what on earth care management is. I mean, we're sort of surrogate family members, but we're registered nurses and fiduciaries and concierges and social workers and an end-of-life doula. So we are certainly consultative in nature, but we also perform actions, right? We will be the adult daughter who can pay bills if mom loses the wherewithal to do that, sell a car that she's no longer driving, transition her to assisted living, hire in-home care for that morning spell where she really struggles to get out of bed, get showered, get dressed, get fed.
One question I had for you was whether, all right, so there's a range of different ways you can build a geriatric care management firm. This is the firm that you built, and it seems to align with it seems to be built in your image. Like, did you just intuit your way to saying, like, this is effectively the service I want to bring?
It was probably more a response to getting in the door a few times, getting to know the people, and being presented with the breadth of their issues and needs, and then realizing, well, we're gonna have to fill that one too. Oh, we should fill that need as well. You and I have talked about this, but aging requires a lot of cross-discipline knowledge and experience. It is a weird, and I think it's a unique facet of life in that regard. The medical knowledge, the legal knowledge, the psychological knowledge. You need to know your local assisted living facilities. You need to know your in-home care. Suddenly it's Part D open enrollment, and I got to know that. And how do I get on claim for long-term care insurance? It requires some degree of experience and knowledge across countless disciplines. And, it was that understanding that started to broaden and deepen what we performed. And even then, we don't We don't do it all. We're not in-home care. You know, we can't do that. We won't do that. We're not hands-on nursing. We're not home health. But aging's complicated, and most people do it once, right?
Yes, that resonates with me. It's similar in some ways to sort of the structuring of how we built common laws, which was just like, hey, if we're going to do this well,
right,
then it needs to look like this.
And don't you find that families are exhausted from having to call so many different experts?
Totally.
Like, we hear a lot that the adult children will say to us, we just want somebody to call who knows what they're doing, versus being told, hey, have you tried this outfit? You know, or having to be those aggregators themselves. That's time consuming. It is. The aging requires more phone calls and conversations than anybody, myself included, anybody ever imagined.
Yeah, and it to me it helps to explain, that reality helps to explain why so many folks will sort of pull the ripcord and say, all right, we're going to relocate. We're going to find a community with the hope that it is a comprehensive solution to this
It simplifies things.
Yeah, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm curious kind of about your process, and how do folks present? Are there themes to that?
Yeah, there's sort of three typical IKOR clients. The first are the pragmatic older adults themselves. They're married and have no kids, or it's a widowed woman, man without children, or children are remote, or there's estrangement or dysfunction there. But they have a realistic sense of what's coming. They may not know it all, but they're pragmatic enough to know aging requires some support. I'm going to get in front of that wave, and I'm going to hire a company like a safety net under me so that when and if, you know, I'm struggling to manage the logistics of my own life, somebody is there. So that kind of able-bodied, clear-headed, pragmatic older adult.
What a gift.
I know.
That's got to be the smaller of the pools of.
Well, and it's funny because part of, you know, when I'm introducing IKOR and what we do, I'm almost always complimenting them. The fact that you're sitting here, whether you hire IKOR or not, the fact that you're sitting here, you're going to age better than a lot of folks.
Yeah, just being educated about it is kind of 80% of it.
Right? And being accepting that support may be needed.
Yeah.
Versus the competency paradigm where I'm a pioneer. I've run my own life my whole life. The other IKOR client has got an older adult child who has called us. So we're hearing from the adult child or some family member or neighbor who's saying, "Hey, I'm getting worried about Mary. Here's what we're observing," and those clients are a little more wobbly, right? There is enough going wrong there that it's become noticeable to others. And then the third is the most extreme. Things aren't going wrong. Things are wrong. The wheels are off the bus. So it's Adult Protective Services calling us. It's a trustee. It's an estate attorney. It's a wealth advisor saying, you know, she just wrote a check. This is a real example. Hey, they wrote a check for $15,000 to a woman we can't trace or find or know who she is or what the check was for. You know?
Yeah. That
sort of stuff is happening. Or the utilities get cut off or the mortgage goes into foreclosure. Not because they don't have the money. They just don't have the wherewithal to manage mail and perform the bill pay anymore. I mean, those types of things.
It's kind of astounding how these things, where the flags go up, right?
Yeah.
Like what in our society, what in our system becomes the inadvertent
trigger alarm.
Yeah.
And, you know, dementia's tricky. I mean, you can be highly functional and still have mild cognitive impairment. You can also mask it really well. I mean, you can have a casual 10-minute conversation with somebody and feel that everything about that conversation was completely normal, but they're significantly impaired. We always find it helps to look beyond the conversation you've just had with them and start analyzing the logistics of their life. If those are fumbling, those are smoke signals.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I wonder, how long have you been doing this?
9 years. 9 years.
9 years. So I'm curious when you lay your head down at night, like what would worry you about your own older adulthood? Like what are you super eager to avoid?
Being exploited. If I'm widowed women of means are just the most desirable target for bad people. And of course, talk about that competency paradigm. I sit here and think, well, how could that ever be me? I mean, this is the field I work in. I spot these idiots, these bad guys. I mean, I see them. I know. But am I guilty of my own self-assuredness that couldn't possibly be me? And they're going to get more creative, and AI is getting better at this. And now the voice of your grandson can call you.
Yeah.
Actually, your grandson's voice can call you and say, "Grandma, I'm in jail. I need a $10,000 bond." What's it going to look like when I'm 80?
How much of that do you see today?
A lot.
Really?
It's...
Who's doing the exploit? Is it a lot of like adjacent folks, or is it strangers?
It's both.
Yeah.
AI seems to be increasing the amount of stranger exploitation, but still the majority of it are people they know, trusted people they know.
Man,
you can do a lot of harm with trust, right?
Yeah, that's brutal. And under the guise of doing well, or also, look at all I've done, I deserve this.
It's funny. I've sort of, not in any scientific manner, but I've sort of put the exploiters in a couple of different camps. And one are the otherwise good people.
Yeah.
They go to bed at night believing they're good people, and in most aspects of their life they are. They're kind, they're responsible, they go to work every day, but they're put in a position of power, and the money is right there. It's right there, and no one would know. And I had an unexpected car repair bill, and I'm just, Grandma will pay for that. And it's this sort of accidental exploiter, right?
Yeah.
They fall into it. Then we see the sort of vengeful exploiter. Some of our clients weren't good parents, and the adult children can enjoy the shift in who's vulnerable. And sometimes we'll see vengeance exploitation.
Yeah.
I'm the captain now.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And that's tough. And then the third camp are just genuinely bad people,
Yeah,
right? Just
scumbags,
the jerks out there who've kind of deliberate and planful about it.
What when you're playing pickle and someone comes up to you and like, oh, you're in this space, like, are they like, what presents, like, what are thematically, like, what are people? What's a question you get a lot?
My mom's home alone. She doesn't want help, but boy, oh boy, I think she needs it. It's the sort of It's a request for an assessment. Is my worry valid or not? You know, I'm getting nervous, but maybe it's okay.
Psychoanalyze that for me. Is it so that I feel like so much of the planning and response to this stage in life by adult children happens very retroactively, or very, maybe opportunistically is the right word. We're at lunch, this person is talking about their experience, and it maybe triggers this experience, or, oh, this is Katie and she does this, and like,
right.
So they've been sitting on that for 2 weeks, a year, 3 years, those
right.
worries. What do you make of that?
Couple of things. I mean, I think one is just the dynamic between parents and children. There's a hierarchy there. It can be tough to break out of that. Two, I'm Gen X, and and within my cohort, we had pretty hands-off parents. Loved us. That's not but in the summer, I was one of 3 kids. My mom gave us a bowl of cold cereal, kicked us out of the house, and we weren't expected home till dinner. Water from the hose, running around the woods, doing things that were great, doing things we shouldn't have done. But it was a pretty hands-off parenting approach. And so now when that elder is struggling, imagine this kid who has been raised in a laissez-faire, sort of hands-off parenting culture, now being expected to intervene and take the wheel and begin making decisions that didn't come from the parent. I think Gen X has I don't know that I've described it well, but there's something there, I think, about my cohort.
That's really fascinating. You're parenting your parents the way your parents parented you, or at least that's a baseline. Those are both interesting observations. I think some other things I've ruminated on are the there's just a fatigue component to it, and how many times can we get into the arena, and then there's a deference, right? Like, most folks at least say they want to stay at home.
Right.
My deep conviction at this stage in my career is that 98% of those who say that don't really understand what that entails, and a large portion might still desire to stay at home if they did, but they're just kind of talking at that point.
Right.
I don't want to leave here. And then if you try to unpack that with them,
it's a feeling, not a plan. And you're right.
It's a feeling, not a plan.
If you present scenarios or ask the smart questions, they can begin to see that part of the plot is missing.
Yeah.
But
one area I end up clarifying a lot is this notion of, okay, what will break in, like, what is it going to be that breaks that makes that no longer possible for you?
Right.
And I think the vast majority of people believe that they will reach a level of acuity where they can no longer remain home. And that is virtually never the case. There are breaking points, but they don't tend to be clinical. It's not that your level of personal care need gets to X and therefore there's a location in which you need to go. It tends to be financial, it tends to be relational, it tends to be isolation, insert others.
Right.
But folks don't understand it.
We here, just as you do, we want to age in place. And so we'll drive out for that initial assessment. And, they're a 35-minute drive from emergency services. They've got 8 acres and a riding mower and a 3-story farmhouse with the master bedroom on the 2nd floor and a clawfoot tub they got to step in and out of. And, you've got to start that conversation of, I understand and respect your goal, but let's talk about whether there are elements of this environment that are going to frustrate you achieving your goal. And sometimes those conversations go well, sometimes they don't. And, that competency paradigm. I've walked this flight of stairs for the last 37 years. You think I don't have this?
So let's play it out. So you're being brought out by adult daughter to the farmhouse where mom or dad, or just mom or just dad lives, and they ain't going nowhere. And what then? And daughters, it's always daughters.
I know.
Once in a while, there's a fella in
right.
there, but
You're
by
right.
and large, it's daughters. They're highly anxious. So what's the process?
We can't force our services on anybody, nor can you. I have to sometimes tell my team, we cannot save them all.
Yeah.
It's a horrible thing to say, and my nurses in particular often refuse that. They're the hardest to convince. We're not going to save this situation.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it's a conversation around, look, our job isn't to march in here and tell you how to live your life. We couldn't if we tried. Our job is to understand how you want to live and help increase the likelihood that that's going to come true. So that's the conversation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And from there, we might go for a small win. I tell a story. We walked into a gentleman's house, very much a master of the universe. Wealth, success, pillar of the community, well-known figure of competency and agency. And we walked in there, and there were fires. The fire alarms were going off all over the place. And he didn't need any help. He didn't need us. His daughter had dragged us in, and she's overreacting, and he's fine. He's very polite. Really, you're lovely. I really appreciate you swinging by. I got this. And he talked a lot about, he's on the phone all day, and he still was kind of had a consulting role over the business he had sold decades ago.
Yeah.
And spent a long time at this desk. And it was like a movie scene. It was the CEO's desk, right? It was this big wooden heavy thing and a big swivel leather chair behind it, and he sat at his desk.
I kind of love that, but yeah.
Right. It was a mess. There were 12 inches of paper all over this desk. And so we played into the CEO and said, yeah, you probably don't need IKOR. I wonder, though, if you could use our secretarial services. What if one of our admins just came in here and created a filing system so you could stay in control of all that you're responsible for? And he loved the idea, right? And one of my employees went in and created a filing, cleaned the desk, made bins with labels, and cleaned out his file cabinet, got it all situated. Well, that took several hours over the course of several days, and then rapport was built and trust was established. And don't get me wrong, there were 1,000 other more important things we needed to be working on. But we started with his desk because it spoke to his identity, and he could fathom an administrative support system. And those little wins can sometimes be the opening to something more meaningful, which was true in this case.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Compelling too that, and maybe I overstate this in my conversations, but there's just so much value if you can't be proactive in knowing who you're going to call when things are going to break.
Right.
Because it's a hard moment. Things break fast and they break big. And so there's a massive emotional and practical difference in having Katie in your phone to call when
Right.
you go from, well,
Right.
things were hanging on by a thread and the thread snapped, and so now we need to bring you in and solve a bunch of problems because it's no longer up to dad or mom.
And to the older adults resistant, you have a threshold of what you're willing to do by yourself. You just haven't. Most folks haven't analyzed what that point is. What's that line of demarcation? And so, it's if you're alone and in pain and frightened, what are you willing to tolerate to maintain this self-talk of I don't need help.
Yeah. In our planning with older adults, we also talk a lot about just the collaboration among their families and how so often, older adult or adult child has a plan, but they're not on the same page.
Right.
And that's a tough one too. I mean, it's raising older adults is a challenge. I'm inclined to call it a fool's errand, but it's part of our cycle. It's part of what we do.
And most people have. I still want to believe that there is something you can land on in the mind of that person that will allow them to see a little more realistically. And for every person, that's a different thing. But advocacy requires proximity, and so you gotta know there is that time it takes to understand and get to know them, and family can be instrumental there. But it's this constant search, I think, to find that conversation point that will allow them to let a little more light in. And maybe I'm naive, but I always feel like it's there and I'm determined to go find it.
I think it's interesting because we don't have that many arrows. You have more arrows in your quiver than most to bring forth a team of folks, both a skill set to bring into a conversation like that to find the access points, but then resources to apply to those.
Execute on them.
Yes.
Yep.
Whereas, for us, we end up talking a lot about, hey, this would be a gift to your children. And that can motivate some.
Yep.
But it doesn't, but
doesn't solve them all.
It doesn't solve them all. And, that doesn't mean I need care. I'm glad to know about you. Whereas you can maybe come in more surgically and say, like, well, you don't need care, of course, but what you might need is someone to drop
a personal assistant.
Right, exactly.
A valet.
A valet.
Right.
Interesting.